Jodan Sogi Jonam La Chanchu Bardu Dane Kyabsu Chi Taki Jinsu Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Penchir Sanje Drubrasho Sanje Jodan Sogi Jonam La Chanchu Bardu Dane Kyabsu Chi Dage Jinsu Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Penchir Sanje Drubrasho Sanje Jodan Sogi Jonam La Chanchu Bardu Dane Kyabsu Chi Dage Jinsu Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Penchir Sanje Drubrasho Monam Kadang Nyampe Senchen Tamche Dewa Dang Dewe Gyundan Dempra Gyurji Dungyao Dang Dungyao Gi Gyudan Drewa Gyurji Dungyao Mepe Dewa Dang Me Drewa Gyurji Nirin Chadang Nidang Drebe Tang Nyong La Nepra Gyurji Monam Kadang Nyampe Senchen Tamche Dewa Dang Dewe Gyundan Dempra Gyurji Dungyao Dang Dungyao Gi Gyudan Drewa Gyurji Dungyao Mepe Dewa Dang Me Drewa Gyurji Nirin Chadang Nidang Drewe Tang Nyong La Nepra Gyurji Monam Kadang Nyampe Senchen Tamche Dewa Dang Dewe Gyundan Dempra Gyurji Dungyao Dang Dungyao Gi Gyudan Drewa Gyurji Dungyao Mepe Dewa Dang Me Drewa Gyurji Nirin Chadang Nidang Drewe Tang Nyong La Nepra Gyurji In all the worlds of the 10 directions reside Tathagatas of the 3 times. Before each of you lions among humans, I prostrate joyfully with body, speech, and mind. By the power of this aspiration to noble deeds, all conquerors appear vividly in my mind. With as many bodies as there are atoms in all lands, I prostrate to all you conquerors. In each atom a Buddha as numerous as atoms, all in the midst of the heirs of the Buddhas. Thus I conceive of this Dharma Dhatu as completely filled with you conquerors in this way. With infinite oceans of praise and oceans of diverse melodies, I sing the excellent qualities of all you conquerors, and praise all of you come to bliss. With the best flowers and best garlands, best music, ointments, and excellent parasols, finest lamps and superior incense, I offer to you conquerors. With excellent garments and best fragrances, and sandal with powder, heap high as Mount Meru. All wondrous offerings perfectly arranged I offer to you conquerors. These vast and unequal offerings to each and every one of you conquerors. With the power of conviction in noble deeds, I prostrate and offer to all you conquerors. All the harmful deeds that I have done with my body, speech, and mind. Under the power of desire, hatred, and ignorance, I confess each and every one of them. I rejoice in all the meritorious deeds of all conquerors in the 10 directions and the heirs of the Buddhas. Solitary realizers, hearers still in training and beyond, and all wandering beings. You who are lamps of the worlds of the 10 directions, who have unobstructedly attained Buddhahood through the stages of Bodhi. All you who are my protectors, please turn the unexcelled wheel of Dharma. With palms together, I earnestly beseech you who may intend to manifest final nirvana. Please remain for as many eons as there are atoms in the world for the happiness and well-being of all wandering beings. Whatever slight virtue that may have been gathered through prostrating, offering, confessing, rejoicing, requesting, and beseeching, I now dedicate to complete Bodhi. The lotus ground sprinkled with scented waters and strewn with flowers, adorned with the supreme mountain, fall, continent, sun, and moon, I visualize as a Buddha land and offer it. May all wandering beings experience such a pure land. To the Gurus who possess the three kayas, I offer the outer, inner, secret, and thusness offerings. With my body, wealth, and all phenomenal existence, please grant the unsurpassed supreme attainment. Whatever slight virtue I may have gathered through prostrating, offering, confessing, rejoicing, requesting, and beseeching, I now dedicate it all to complete Bodhi. Om Guru Deva Dhakini Rena Mandala Prateja Soha. Please turn the wheel of Dharma of the greater, lesser, and common vehicles in accordance with the dispositions and mental capacities of sentient beings. Doji Chanchen Pile Naroda, Mamita Popado Jindin Gonkaden Zundin Sawe Lame Shasa Yulama Yudam Chokyong La Soba Depso Dagi Jin Jilo Kya Bengi Dome Zamlenge Drabe Don Song Yong La Kyab Zome Kya Wado Je Chang Pa Jindin Kumpo Shabla Dodo Tato Samge Kya Leme Jin Jilo Shitu Je Nenge Mun Pelsen Ne Kyam Zendo Dedo Topa Jin Jilo Hong Jin Jin Chang Song Pema Kesa Tumpo La Yasen Jogyen Gadumne Pema June Sheshu Kodo Kando Mungpun Korke Jese Dha Deke Jin Jilo Jin Shesu So Guru Pema Sede Hong Min Chuki Nigin Podan Nendo Sen Chanje Kungi Gomone Ransen Chokung Monsun Tonse Batsa We Lame Shabla So Wade. So very good morning and good evening to everyone. We continue with the Bodhicharyavatara. I have some good news. Not this coming Tuesday, but the following Tuesday. The following Tuesday, June the 14th, is Sakadawa Duchen. Duchen means like the great festival of the Sakadawa month, which is then the full moon of the Sakadawa month. So on the full moon day of the Sakadawa month this year, Kenchen Koncho Gyaltsen Rinpoche has agreed to give the Bodhisattva vows to anyone who wants to receive it formally for the first time, or to renew their commitment to this path to awakening for the benefit of all beings. And so it will be our usual Bodhicharyavatara time, using the same login information. You might have seen, if you are on Facebook, that we're asking people to register. So it's a good idea to register, because then if there's any text or anything that we will be distributing for the Bodhisattva Vow regular training and practice, formal regular training and practice, then we will send those files through the email list that we will compile on the basis of registration. So Javier has just sent the registration link to everyone in the chat screen. So for the generation of Bodhichitta Vow ceremony, it's a very special occasion, of course. So then if you are, maybe some of you are close to where we are in Asho, we will be at the temple with the big screen that we recently installed to have the ceremony there. And if you are at home, then it is good idea, I think, to try to prepare your shrine if you have a shrine. Make it special, clean, put fresh offerings, and then if you can even put your screen, your computer, where your shrine is, then it will create the special effects that we ordinary beings are still reliant on to create a special environment to kind of put our mind in a more heightened state. And by the way, this conferring of the Bodhisattva Vow is open to everyone and anyone who wants to receive it beyond this Bodhicharyavatara class. So you can let other people know about this as well. To prepare for that, it will be good if you go reread the root verses of Bodhicharyavatara of chapter 1, 2, and 3. In these three chapters, the first chapter is called the Excellence of Bodhichitta, and so the Bodhichitta is praised. Then specifically chapter 2 and chapter 3 is the extensive version of taking the Bodhisattva Vow. The extensive version, which begin, as chapter 2, the title of chapter 2 says, by exposing or confessing one's faults, unskillful actions. And so there we are taught how to lay bare, to expose, to no longer hide from ourselves, more than anybody else, and all the ways that we habitually create confusion and suffering for ourselves, for others. So chapter 2 is that the beginning of the preparation for taking Bodhisattva Vow. Then chapter 3 is the actual taking. It's here in my translation it says taking hold of bodhicitta, and so that is the receiving of the Bodhichitta Vow, or here commonly people say Bodhisattva Vow. Yes, so it's good to go review that section, those 3 chapters. So again, this is going to be on June 14th, Sakadawa Duchen. And often it is said, you should amass, gather a great store of merit to serve as a support for your taking of this vow. So again, leading up to that day, it will be good to kind of be alert to the blessings, the power, the benefits of generating great merit as a support for the arising of great wisdom. As a clarification, for those who might be more familiar with the Chinese tradition called taking the Bodhisattva Vow, just to clarify a little bit the differences between that kind of ceremony or event and this. This, in the Tibetan tradition, I think it's better to call it maybe generating bodhicitta, the ceremony, like in Chinese, Fa Pu Xing, rather than taking bodhisattva vows, especially in the Chinese tradition. Because in the Chinese tradition, there is a step or an event, right? A ceremony called taking the Bodhisattva vow. There, in that ceremony, a specific list of vows are actually taken one by one. And just like when you take the 5 vows, the preceptor will say, as for the vow of not killing, are you able to keep or not able to keep? And then you will respond, yes, I will happily keep. As for the vow of not lying, not using deceptive speech, are you able to keep or not? Yes, I am able, right? And so you'll go one by one. So this is also in the Tibetan tradition, for example, when you take the 5 vows. In the Chinese tradition, also like that. Then when the Chinese tradition says taking the Bodhisattva vow, they are actually talking about such an event where point by point. And in that tradition, they have the 10 major vows and the 48 supporting minor vows. So altogether, 58 questions. Are you able to keep this one? Yes, I am. Are you able and happy to keep this? Yes, I am. Are you able and happy to keep this? Yes, I am. And there is a list of 58 altogether. But this is not, for those who are familiar with the Chinese tradition. In this tradition, it's really more generating bodhicitta. Then, of course, after generating bodhicitta, if you know those 10 and 48 precepts of training, then it will serve to support what you have generated, the Bodhichitta. In the Tibetan tradition, when it comes to those specific precepts of training, like listing out, this is what you should avoid, this is what you should avoid, this is what you should avoid, there are several lists that are often used. So for example, in Shantideva's tradition, so Shantideva has three kind of famous texts that he is said to have composed. The most famous is, of course, Bodhicharyavatara, what we are studying. Then there are two other texts. One actually never translated into Tibetan, apparently, but the other one called Compendium of Training, Shiksha Samuchaya, Compendium of Training. In there, he discusses in details these specific, and there I think in his list it might be 16, if I remember correctly, major precepts and 46 minor precepts. So a little different from the Chinese list of 10 and 48. This is maybe either 16, 46 or 10 and 46, something like that. Close to the Chinese list in the Compendium of Training. So of course, in the future, you have the opportunity to learn more about those. And it's good because the precepts serve as concrete reference points, ways to protect the bodhicitta that you have generated. Maybe in the Tibetan tradition it's a little bit suitable to us, because if at the beginning it says, here is a list of 48 things you have to memorize, and make sure you don't do any of those, we hear that, all of us will run away. We're like, no, I cannot generate bodhicitta. And so in the Tibetan tradition, it starts first with a more general, which is to generate both aspiration and engagement bodhicitta vow, which every time we start actually our class, Dala Dangwa Jebedra, that one, that's the aspiration bodhicitta vow. Then De Jedu, until I achieve the state of Buddha, I will engage in virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. And that is the action Bodhichitta vow. So we are already doing this vow, but in a more formal way. We'll take it from in the presence of a preceptor. So actually for that, I want to say, please do your best. You prepare for that on the 14th if you're going to do it. You want to do it with your video on. When we say in the presence of the preceptor, not only you see the preceptor, at least in theory, the preceptor has to be able to see you. It's a different effect, when you know that the preceptor can see you. So please, it's not that difficult. Find a place, find a room in your house, turn on the video so that your preceptor giving the vows can see you. So in the Tibetan tradition, there's another list of the training precepts for after taking Bodhisattva Vow, and that is called 20 verses on the Bodhisattva precepts by this Indian Buddhist master called Chandra Gomin. So Tibetan tradition also study that text as to learn about all the precepts for guarding this bodhicitta. So Chandra Gomin, 20 verses on the Bodhisattva precepts. So once again, a reminder, we are now in the period of the year called Sagadawa, the month of Vaishaka. Saga is the Tibetan of the Sanskrit Vaishaka. Vaishaka is the name of the month. So Vaishaka in Sanskrit, this is the fourth, fifth, you could say, moon of the year according to the Indian calendar. So this month commemorates all the major events in the life of the Buddha. He was born on this month, on the full, in the Tibetan tradition actually it says that he was born on this month on the 7th day. And then he achieved Buddhahood on the full moon day, which is this year, June 14th. And then he passed into Mahaparinirvana on also the same full moon day of Vaishaka. So because of this interdependence, then in some texts it is said that all actions, whether virtuous or non-virtuous, created during this month is multiplied by 100 million times. So Tibetans, know this month as like the 100 million multiplying month. So much so that some people said, oh, Saga refers to 100 million. No, Saga don't refer to 100 million. Saga is the Tibetan contraction of the Sanskrit Vaishaka. But during this month, it's like a heightened season. So everyone, or at least traditionally, everyone is very careful, like, oh, we should only engage in virtue, not engage in non-virtue. So last week, I think, and last time we met, I said, without needing to get into this, actually it's 100 million or 200 million, or is it possible, is it not possible, does karma work in such strange ways that during this month everything becomes so exaggerated, I think the essence of how we should approach this month is that this is a month where we get an opportunity, we give ourselves an opportunity to pay close attention to Buddha's teachings, Buddha's central teaching, which is the teaching on causality. That teaching of causality, on the level of fancy words, fancy ideas, sophisticated, profound instructions and teachings, that principle of causality then is expressed in terms of dependent origination. So that's very fancy, So there's like the 12 links of dependent origination, going forwards, how samsara manifest is created, then going backwards, how you reverse samsara, So very precise, inspiring teachings, also very profound philosophy, right? So that's one way that this central principle of causality needs to be understood. So this month, if you have that capacity, if you have that interest, then you should pay more attention to the central principle of causality with regards to dependent origination. Then Nagarjuna, who greatly expounded on the Buddha's teachings on emptiness, also made it very clear that what is called dependent origination is also exactly what emptiness, shunyata, means. They are two sides of the same coin. So even those teachings on emptiness, they are none other than this central principle of causality. Yeah, so then these things like teachings like dependent origination, teachings like selflessness, which is what we're looking at now, right? And the teachings on emptiness, all of these, you can say, is the view aspect of this central principle of causality. Then, the practical implications of this central principle of causality, what is that? That is none other than all Buddha's teachings on cause and effect, karma and vipaka, cause and effect. And that is where Buddha's extensive instructions, as found in the Vinaya, these vows of individual liberation, so can be summarized, simply as what are the non-virtues, like the 10 non-virtues to be avoided, the 10 virtues to be cultivated. So the teachings on cause and effect is the other side of this causality. And this, of course, also includes, the 6 paramitas to be practiced by bodhisattvas, the 6 perfections, and beyond that, right, called the myriad virtuous qualities to be cultivated by bodhisattvas. So all of that falls under this other side, the practical side. The to be carried out with body, speech, and mind side of this Buddha's teachings on causality. And so this month of Sakadava, we should refocus our attention on what is it at the heart of Buddha Dharma. At the heart of Buddha Dharma is causality. So that's why, I believe, why you have traditions that say, oh, everything you do this month, negative, positive, their effect are multiplied by 100 million times. That sounds like some strange, like, suddenly karma becomes, much more serious. Like the natural, right, process of cause and effect suddenly, becomes exaggerated during this month, Then you think, what's going on? Is this superstition? No. I think this is a skillful way of having us kind of focus on Buddha's teachings on causality. So now returning to our text, we have covered basically the section. So we are in the midst of Shantideva's discussion of the second of the four windows, right? To look into that the Buddha taught, highlighted these four what I call windows to look into, like, who is this? What is this? Right? So the second one is feelings of Vedana. Right? So in Khenpo Kumpel's commentary on this section, in a very helpful way, he divided this section into, into four parts. He says in this section, you examine, Shantideva taught us how to examine the nature of those feelings, which is divided into basically pleasurable, painful, and neutral. Then with regards to pleasurable, what then in a very subtle way what arises is liking. With regards to painful, in a very subtle way, when painful turns up, the reaction is disliking. And then with regards to that which is neutral, then a very subtle, like ignorance of, like, don't care, arises. So these, the first section is the examination of the to examine the nature of those feelings, and we have covered this section, and this section goes from verse 88 to 92. From 93 to 97, here Khenpo Kumpel says it's the examining, to examine the cause of these feelings. Verse 98 is to know more clearly the result of these feelings. Then 98 to 101 is to examine who is it that has these feelings? What is it that has these feelings? In that sense, this last one is the most important, because already we know the answer, but we want to follow his reasoning so that we can have develop the understanding of how the subject, this that which experiences the feelings, even though often when these feelings become strong, the subject appears to be so real. Oh, this I must be so real. But of course, Shantideva is going to show how this I is very fragile, in fact, very unreliable, very illusory. So this is verse 99 to 101. So now I'm going to read from 93 to 97, these verses, for the second, which is the second part, which is the examining the cause of these feelings. So cause here means like what are the mechanics? In other words, how do these feelings arise? What are the mechanics involved? What is the causality involved in the arising of these feelings? If between the sense power and a thing there is a space, how will the two meet? And if there is no space, they form a unity. And therefore, what is it that meets with what? No penetration can there be of particle by particle, for they are both the same in lacking volume. But if they do not penetrate, they do not merge. And if they do not merge, there is no encounter. For how could anyone accept that there is partless, that what is partless could be said to meet? And you must show me if you ever saw a contact taking place between two partless things. Consciousness is immaterial, and so one cannot speak of contact with it. A combination, too, has no reality, just as we have previously shown. If therefore there is no touch or contact, whence is it that feeling takes its rise? What purpose is there then in all our toil? For what is it indeed that torments what? Yes, I think, you read this section, you say, I have no idea, what the heck is he talking about? So we start backwards, as in we start at the end. The bottom line, like the take-home lesson. I think if we understand the take-home lesson, then it might be easier to understand what he's doing in these few verses. So the take-home lesson is he says in 97, the last two lines. What purpose is there then in all our toil? For what is it indeed that torments what? So it says, why? Why do we undergo such lengths of effort, of, in fact, suffering? Of effort and suffering directed towards what? Directed towards principally avoiding pain. So why are we so invested in avoiding pain? Then you say, well, because I don't want pain. So he says, but how does you and pain ever meet? That is the question that he is sort of having us ask. When did you actually meet pain? So then the first two lines of 97, if therefore there is no touch or contact, how does feeling actually arise? Meaning, the feeling arises as a result of contact. So this explanation is actually part of Buddha's basic explanation. Where does Vedana, where does feeling come from? Feeling necessarily need to come from when contact is made. And contact is made between what and what? Between, now, if you go back to the very beginning of 93, it says, sense power, meaning the ability to sense, that power, meets an object to be sensed, to be experienced. So the I consciousness comes into contact with an object of sight. So when that contact takes place, in the more general teachings of causality, it is said when that contact takes place, then Vedana instantly arises. Now Shantideva is going to poke holes. Don't misunderstand, he's not contradicting the Buddha. Because after all, the Buddha explained that process of where feeling comes from. Buddha says feeling comes from contact. Shantideva now takes us deeper, zoom in, so to say, with a microscope, zoom in to that mechanics and say, actually, contact didn't really take place. In fact, cannot really take place. So, 97 first line. If therefore there is no touch or contact in the first place, does feeling actually arise? And if feeling doesn't arise, doesn't really ultimately exist, then what is tormenting what? The last line of 97. No, the last sentence I was reading from verse 97, he says, "For what is it indeed that torments what?" Yeah. Yeah, so the main point in this section is basically Shantideva says, like, what is it? Like we just think, well, I came into contact with pain, and so, I don't like this feeling. So now I need to get rid of this pain, right? So Shantideva says, wait, hold on. Yes. But let's zoom in into your predicament. Let's zoom in into your problem. And when we zoom in into your problem, he says, then the question arises, in the first place, can contact even take place? And if contact cannot take place, what is this feeling that you are so afraid of? Maybe this feeling is not real, which is his bottom line. Actually, this feeling is not real. Then he doesn't say it explicitly here, but you should know. Then you say, then what is this feeling that I'm feeling? It's the result of fixation. It's the result of grasping onto that which is not real, treating it as real. Now you have a supposedly real problem. So now let's take a 10-minute break. And so, by the way, those of you who may not know who Khenchen Rinpoche is, at least one context is, he is the voice that we have been hearing with this Manjushri mantra, Om Bodhichari Mum, that I play before we start during our break. That's his voice.
Om Wage Jware Mum Wage Jware Mum 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 Om Wage Jware Mum Wage Jware Om Wage Jware Mum Wage Jware Mum 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 Om Wage wage jware mum 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 wage jware mum
Yeah, so 93. So let's begin this section and see how Shantideva led us to that conclusion in 97. So this pain, this feeling of pain, or this set of feelings that we habitually label as painful, and then all our efforts to avoid this pain, he says, basically is based on a delusion, based on a projection. So now, beginning of 93, he's going to show us why. So 93, yeah. Let me read once again. If between the sense power and a thing there is a space, then how will these two meet? And if there is no space, then they form a unity. They are one. And therefore, if they are one, then what is meeting what? So I'm going to read from Khenpo Gumpel because it's easy to understand, this section when he explains it. So he says, so those of you who have this Khenpo Gumpel's commentary translated into English, it's page 362. So he says, a physical sense faculty and its physical object, such as form, for like the eye. So let's say the eye consciousness, and what eye sees are forms. He says, these two, they are either separated by space or they are not separated. If they are separated, how can contact take place? In other words, that does that which is doing the seeing, that which is doing the seeing, and that which is seen. He says there must be two things, and if there are two things, then there must be space in between them. But then he says, but then now if there is space between them, then how do they touch each other? In other words, when we say contact means touching each other. How can they touch each other? He says, if they are not touching each other, if they're not conjoined, then they do not meet. And so they are then like two mountains, he says, one in the east and one in the west. He says, okay, now you might then be tempted to say, then there's no space between the two. There's no space between the two. Because now that you can see, there's a space between the two, then we have a problem. So now you might be tempted to say, there's no gap between these two. So then he says, if you say there's no gap between the two, then these two have become one. And in that case, if they are one, what is seeing what? It would be meaningless to say, for example, that the I is in contact with itself. He says, then contact assumes two things. Uh, 94, that section, no penetration can there be of a particle by particle, for they are both the same in lacking volume. But if they do not penetrate, they do not merge. And if they do not merge, there is no encounter. So here is he's talking about penetration means one thing kind of going into another thing, like these fingers, like this. But before we talk about particles doing this, particle is referring to smallest unit of things. The smallest unit going like this. So instead of touching, more than touching, can we say that the two things are doing this? So Khenpo Kumpel says, before we look directly at 94, there's one step before this logic here, which is continuing from the previous verse that says, they are either separated by space or they're not separated by space. Then he says, so if both two, those two possibilities, they are separated by space or they're not separated by space, he has already shown how they don't really make sense. Then Khenpo Kumpel said, well, but maybe you say, well, how about like this? Isn't there now two things touching each other? Right? Like your hands, left hand, right hand, put together. Namaste. Amitofo. Aren't they two touching each other? Khenpo Kumpel says, no, not really. So then he says, Look, what we're talking about here is the I consciousness, right? And how it connects with an object of sight. And so these are the two particles, so to say, that we're talking about, he says. Insofar as these two, for example, he says, you cannot use the example of like left hand touching right hand. He says that analogy doesn't fit. He says, because what we're looking at when we say the I consciousness comes into contact with an object of sight is that if these are two separate, right, two distinct like particles or things, right, then things necessarily have direction to them. Front side, back side, left side, right side. If there are two things, then they have direction. And then you say, wait. Really? He says, yes, including even like a moment of sight. There, what is the front side, back side, left side, right side? And not literally like physically front side, back side, left side, right side. There will be the first moment, the second moment, and the third moment. There's some passage of time, and therefore that particle, so to say, the experience of sight, now will have these directions. Then he says, when it comes to having these directions, then he says, when front, if contact is made from the front, he says, no contact is made from the back. And therefore, that contact is, in other words, incomplete. Only one side can touch the other side. Then when one side can touch the other side, and if this is a moment of sight, touching an object of sight, it's an incomplete touch, in other words. And this is how it leads to 94 talking about fusing. Like that, no longer like this, now like that. But he will show like that also not possible. Or he will argue. Whether he convinces you or not, I leave it to you. So 94 here, he says, Shantideva says, why can they not do this? Why can they not do this? Because both of them lack volume. Things that lack volume cannot be said to do this. First, you need to have some density before one can go into the other. Some sort of density has to be there. And he says, but since, like in this example, the sight and what is seen don't have density, then you say, wait, no, what is seen is the chair. How come there's no density? No, it is not the chair that is seen. It's an image of the chair, right? So that image has no volume. And your power of sight has no volume. So they cannot kind of push into each other. They cannot penetrate. And so if they do not penetrate, then they also do not merge this way. And so if they don't merge this way, then there's, again, no contact. That's 94. "95, he goes, for how could anyone accept that what is partless could be said to meet? And he says, and you must show me if you ever saw a contact taking place between two partless things. So then this is in the wake, right? In the case of 94, where it says, well, this also cannot happen because there's no volume, right? Then and this the need to go to this, right, is based on these particles with parts. These supposed particles, right, with parts. So with parts, you say, okay, it's not because of the problem of, like, if the front side meets this front side, then it's an incomplete contact, because what about all the other sides? Then due to that, then you say, oh, well, what about this? Then he says, no, this is not possible because there's no volume involved. So cannot. Then now you might say, it's not very clear here, but now the opponent might say, well, what if these two things are partless? They don't have parts to them. So then you don't have the problem, right, of not enough touching or things without volume touching. Now I will just say, well, they are partless. So if they're partless, now they can have contact. Shantideva says, actually, how can partless things have contact? Because contact is based on one thing touching the other thing. If there's no parts to them, he says, you show me how does partless things have established contact with each other? Not possible. 95. So, 95, right? He says, a contact taking place between two partless things. If you ever saw anything like that, please show me. His sarcasm. So what is a good example of a partless thing? Are there partless things? Yes, space. But can you say, let's say you have a door separating two rooms, right? A door separating two rooms. When you open the door, have you seen the space in this room touching the space in this room? He says, you go ahead, show me that, he says. Not possible. So then 96, he says, consciousness is immaterial. It's not physical. So one cannot speak of contact with it. A combination too has no reality, just as we have previously shown. That's verse 96. Let me read Khenpo Kumbel's commentary. He says, if, however, it is contended that there is nevertheless contact between mind and objects, then Shantideva replies that this is unacceptable to speak of a meeting between a physical thing and the mind, which is not physical. He says, for to say that, you might as well say, one could touch space with one's hand or meet the child of a barren woman. Both meeting the child of a barren woman and touching space, right? It's just a matter of speech. In reality, it never happens. Like, for example, we say, oh, I'm touching space. No, you're not touching space. Space cannot be touched. Space is immaterial. It's just your hand moving in space, you're not touching space. Yes, so then Khenpo Kunpao continues. He says, of course, it will be said that it is inappropriate to use these examples, hand touching space, meeting the child of a barren woman, because with regard to the mind, because the mind exists. So here Khenpo Kunpao says, okay, the mind exists. I'm not going to dispute that right now. But what he says, but coming back to here, he says, what we are talking about here is the possibility of contact between a material thing and an immaterial thing. So let's tentatively say, okay, mind exists. So mind is that immaterial thing. And then what mind perceives, whether through sight, sound, smell, taste, or touch, those things are physical things. It says, at issue here is it truly possible for contact to take place? Now, to be clear, elsewhere, Buddha did teach. Buddha says, when you look at how experience takes place, basically what happens there is, let's say sight, the experience of sight taking place, right? So what happens there is a sense power, meaning like a functioning eye, a functional eye, a non-damaged eye exist. And then there is what's called eye consciousness, right? It's also present. Then an object of sight, form and colors exist. When these three converge, then contact takes place. When contact takes place, then Vedana arises. Yes, elsewhere Buddha did teach us to zoom in to see how experience arises from moment to moment. For sure, Buddha did teach this. What Shantideva is negating here is not what Buddha taught. No. He is having us look more closely. In other words, have a more detailed, profound understanding of what is, as Khenpo Kunpao says, what are the mechanics of feelings being experienced? What is the cause? What is here? Cause means the mechanics. But, he says, this teaching about how experience arises when these three elements converge, he says, we are not to think that this is what really happens. He says, at best, we are to understand this as simply describing an illusory, ephemeral, confused experience arising. That the Buddha described experience as taking place in such a way, he did not mean for us to take that description as describing something that is ultimately happening. He's simply deconstructing the experience which we otherwise would fixate as, oh, it's real, it's permanent. He's using this explanation to diffuse, to deconstruct our fixation. So now Khenpo Kumbel says in 97, right? He says, therefore, if there's no contact acting as cause, from where do feelings result? From where does feelings come from? No real place. Khenpo Kumbel continues, he says, feelings themselves have no existence on the ultimate level. And if that is so, what sense is there in exhausting ourselves, in demanding pleasure and turning away from pain? So he says, we spend so much effort then, chasing pleasurable, that which is pleasurable, and running around like a headless chicken, trying to escape that which is painful. He says, how foolish. Instead of doing that, see the illusory, ephemeral, unstable nature of feelings. Whether you label pleasure, whether you experience as painful, or even neutral. See that those experiences cannot be permanent, cannot be real, therefore illusory. And even this mind that experiences them, it's a confused mind. It's an illusory mind. So today, we're going to stop here. Then again, about the taking of the Bodhichitta vow, generating Bodhichitta vow, with Khenchen Rinpoche as the preceptor, again, to prepare for that. So one part is the Shantideva, the first 3 chapters, the root text, then looking at the confession part and the taking hold of Bodhicitta, chapter 2 and 3. Then, like practical preparation, like I said, you want to think ahead, and say, okay, if I have a shrine, I'm going to, prepare fresh offerings, special offerings. Then even yourself coming to participate. This is sort of saying you are going to be born again, like Christians, born again experience. You're going to be born again as a new person, as a bodhisattva. So put some intention in there and look at your wardrobe, and say, okay, what special thing can I wear that day? Sometimes Asian teachers have said, in one side, Westerners are really good, they are like yogis, they don't care about how they wear, what they wear, meaning, people even come to Dharma centers, events, wearing like sweatpants, because the idea is, oh, I just want to be comfortable. Of course, the Tibetan Lama said, oh, they're like yogis, they just don't even think about what they wear. But there's also about laziness. I think the Lamas are too kind to say that. Like, don't be lazy. Don't be so casual. When you're coming for an empowerment, when you're coming for a to take the Bodhisattva vow, put some intention in your outer appearance. Then again, some of you might say, well, Milarepa did not do that. And Milarepa also doesn't have an iPhone. Milarepa also doesn't have a 60-inch TV. You spend all your resources getting those things, and then when it's convenient to you, you say, oh, but Milarepa did not do those things. Why do I have to do those things? You cannot have your cake and eat it too, so to say. You cannot try to have everything working to serve your kind of inattentiveness or laziness or confusion and say, oh, I'm a Dharma practitioner. It's not going to work that way. So we like with Milarepa, we like misquote him all the time, and how we should be inspired by him, we're not inspired. Instead, we use him as an excuse. I hear people say things like this all the time, like, wow, why do I need a shrine? Milarepa, he has no shrine. Yeah, Milarepa also don't have underwear. How much money you're buying your designer underwear to wear? If you're wearing underwear, don't compare yourself to Milarepa. Sometimes Milarepa doesn't even have pants. Also, people will say things like, "Oh, I'm not really interested in monastic life, And that is fine, Like you're not interested in monastic life. No, what to say, No problem, Maybe I also not interested in monastic life. I get it, Not interested in monastic life. But where I don't get is they will follow up with a statement like, I'm more like Milarepa. I like that style. You are not living like Milarepa at all, okay? Don't excuse your non-interest in monastic life by saying, I'm going to be like Milarepa. Milarepa had nothing to eat. He could only eat nettles until he turned green. I don't see you, shopping at the supermarket buying only the cheapest vegetable you can find. You're eating all kinds of things. You're having your $7, frappuccino. That's not living like Milarepa, excuse me. So Milarepa has one line we should take to heart. He says, my religion. Of course, there's no such word as religion in Tibetan, meaning my dharma. My religion, my way of life, what I believe in, is not kidding myself, not deceiving myself. So if you want to follow Milarepa, that line you have to take to heart. Be brutally honest with yourself. Don't kid yourself. Changju sem chorin poche ma ge ba nam ge gyunche ge ba nyam pa me pa yang Have a good weekend. Ta-ta, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Lai.
Thank you.
Gracias.